Okay, thank you very much, Olivier, and Aspetar for allowing me to present my stuff here. Today I'm going to talk to you about repeated sprint training in Normobaric Hypoxia. It's a project I've just finished in collaboration with the Altitude Centre, London South Bank University, and British Tennis. So as we've already seen today, repeated sprints are crucial to team and racket sports because the nature of the sport is that they are going to have lots of repeated bouts of intense exercise, normally sprinting for generally less than 10 seconds, interspersed with brief recovery periods of less than around 60 seconds. And the ability to maintain speed of these sprints throughout the game is crucial. As we saw earlier, you can have that decrease in over repeated sprints. So what we want to do is see can repeated sprint training in hypoxia help improve performance in this type of athlete. So what we already know about hypoxia is that when we add high intensity training rather than low steady endurance, we see that there potentially an augment a peripheral adaptation, but also there's been a paper that showed an improvement in endurance performance in time to exhaustion. So what we want to do, and what we'll give a look over here, is look at whether we can optimize the hypoxic dose for this specific data set, so using sprints, and then also determine whether a 4-week training block in intermittent athletes is actually going to give you any gains. So optimizing the dose, I won't really go into much detail on this one because I've only got 10 minutes, but the paper's under review, so hopefully it'll be coming out soon. 10 6-second sprints on a non-motorized treadmill. We used them at a variety of doses, 15, 14, 13 and 12%. And the results, and I apologise, the slide's quite busy, but just here we're seeing is we've got heart rate for every sprint and then blood lactate for the entire session for each dose. And what we can see here is that at 13%, we're getting the largest physiological response. So we're having the largest heart rate and the largest blood lactate at the end. Whereas what you can actually just about make out for the white bar, the 12%, is that once we go beyond this 13% mark, where it's actually coming back down. So part of the reason for that is when we actually measure speed throughout the session. So speed decrement takes into account every sprint compared to the best one of the session. We can see that 12% is where we have a significant decrease in speed. So that's what we're sort of aligning with the fact that we're not getting as large a heart rate or a heart rate response or blood lactate. Whereas 13%, we were able to get very similar speeds to our Normoxic trial. So here we've got a little video of what the guys are doing. So on non-motorized treadmills, hypoxic machines hooked up to big reservoirs. So we counted them down and then we would shout go. They go for 6 seconds, a lot of verbal encouragement and jump off. And then they'd have 30 seconds rest. So we used a 4-week study, 12 sessions, 10 6-second sprints with 30 seconds in between, and 5 minutes pre and post in both conditions. And then we had a single blinded control, and then the coaches, after all the consent forms were all signed, decided that all the players, if they all believed they were hypoxic, we're just going to leave it as that. So all players believed they were in the hypoxic group. And then what's worked really well with this is we've used elite rugby academy players, so between the ages of 18 and 21, and it fit into their pre-season. So normally it actually is part of a warm-up for their weights, albeit quite an intense one. So pre and post testing, all done in Normoxia. We did field testing and a physiological test. We did maximal sprints, so 5, 10, 20 meters were measured, a repeated sprint test, and then the yo-yo intermittent recovery test to measure endurance. For the physiological test, we used the same protocol, 10 6-second sprints. We measured cerebral and quadricep near-infrared spectroscopy, cardiopulmonary variables, speed, pulse oximetry, and heart rate. So our results. The field tests, as you can see here, maximal speed The percentage going down is obviously a good thing as the time's getting smaller. We can see that both groups got faster. However, there was no actual difference between either group. And interesting, we had the same result for repeated sprint ability over 20 metres. We saw, again, both groups getting a tiny bit better, but no difference between them. So whereas when we looked at the yo-yo test for endurance, we can see that there was a remarkable increase in performance for the hypoxic group. They went up 32% versus the hypoxic 14%. And what is interesting here is when we look at the individual results, so each line here is a player, we can see that although standard deviation's around the 11-10 mark, actually the range is a lot larger, going from sort of around the 12% up to 56 in the hypoxic, and the -3 up to about 33 in the normoxic. So there's a lot of variation. So moving on to our physiological tests on the treadmill, what was interesting here is that actually we did see close to a significant change where the hypoxic group were getting a better speed decrement score. So in other words, they're able to maintain their speeds throughout the trial better. And potentially this is because this on the treadmill was 6-second sprints, whereas the 20-metre sprint was about 3 seconds. And part of the reason that is because we did it in a gymnasium where you're only going to get 30 metres, so 5-metre runoff. It's a bit of a difficult test. But then we also saw close to a significant increase in total VO2 in the hypoxic group, whereas there was no change in the normoxic. This was measured over, so during the sprints, during the recovery, and during the 5 minutes post afterwards. And then when we looked at the pre-sprint, so just before each sprint, cerebral deoxygenation, this is area under the curve, so this is putting all the sprints together. We can see again another interesting, very close, significant result where the hypoxic group had less deoxygenation. So in theory, we'd have a better oxygenation profile before the start of each sprint. Whereas we didn't see this in the quadricep. So there was a bit more variation, but again, there was no real difference between either group. And then afterwards, just to keep kind of an applied setting, we decided to have a look at whether any of these field tests would change 4 weeks post. So take the stimulus away, what would happen? So this wasn't very strictly controlled. This was the guys went back to their normal training sessions. And we didn't get every single participant either. So statistically, it's not significant. But the trend was that the hypoxic group were able to maintain or improve upon their yo-yo test, whereas the normoxic group were almost reverting back to their pre-scores. So in conclusion, repeated sprint training in hypoxia does significantly increase speed endurance in elite intermittent sport athletes. This is important to us because an increase in the yo-yo test is correlated with an increase of the amount of high-intensity running we can do during football. And that 13% seems to be is sufficient for the team training to increase the physiological stimulus while maintaining speed. So in an applied elite setting, we have found that hypoxia complements pre-season training. It is very time efficient, so it's only 16 minutes a session, which could actually be decreased itself, compared to a normal interval session that we would perform of around 30 to 45 minutes. But there is quite an individual variation in response to hypoxia. So whereas we found that dose was optimal in general terms, whether that is true of each individual is further to be seen. So I'd like to thank all my colleagues that have helped out, and thank you very much.
Okay, before we kick off the question, I was just wondering what's the performance level of your athletes, because you showed quite important improvement in performance after the yo-yo test, 30%. So
30, sorry.
You did show some improvement in performance, about 30%, right?
Yes, yeah.
So I was just wondering what's the level of your athletes involved in your protocol, because it's quite impressive.
Yes, yeah. So their pre-scores for the yo-yo test were around 16, 17, which is it's not elite, top elite end, but it's still very good. Going into a lot more detail into the data, we can see that there's no difference. So it isn't just the guys who start at the bottom getting those big increases. Some of the guys at the top have gone from 18 up to 20, and actually we'd say that's a more of a significant result for them because they've gone, to get that much better at the top end is a lot more important.
Yeah. Anyone wants to comment?
Thanks, Harvey. Really interesting presentation, and the yo-yo stuff is of particular interest to me because we've just completed an IHT study, and one of the measures we used was yo-yo performance, and this was in Australian footballers one rung below the elite competition in Australia, so sub-elite, but quite handy and probably similar to the guys you used. And we saw a 17% improvement in yo-yo performance against training-matched controls after 3 sessions of IHT. Okay. So that was bike sessions with longer intervals, but it seems to be a very real finding. We found it too, and it's a quick change, and at same sort of time course, it lasted around 3 to 4 weeks post-intervention as well. So they went up even a bit more in the 2nd and 3rd weeks and kept it. So it's
I think, like I said, we didn't actually get to control the training that they did afterwards, but the feedback from the coaches was that those guys that got that much better were then pushing harder in training. Whereas some of the other guys generally weren't. So
fortunate, my PhD student was also the person in charge of the training at that club, so it's relatively easy to match.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you very much.